G'day and welcome to another big edition of Play by Pod. My name's Chris Yeend and it's awesome being in your company and appreciate all the feedback after the first edition was run and won. Today we've got a very special guest with us here, all the way from South Australia, one of the veterans of the SANFL, and made his AFLW debut on the weekend for Wharf Radio, Chris Kendall. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Absolute pleasure, Chris, and particularly, joining yourself. I've been following your work with great interest in the last couple of seasons, so nice to finally actually get a chance to talk face to face.
Absolutely, mate. No, I appreciate that. It's just amazing how broadcasting can connect people from all over the country. It's just an absolute thrill.
Look, when I started, we didn't have anything like this. To give you the quiet tip, it was probably not much above tin cans and string back in the olden days when I first started this gig. So having the option now that we can do this sort of stuff, as you know, it's revolutionised broadcasting a lot of ways for us as well. So we're moving into a really exciting time of broadcasting, and this sort of stuff just really complements it.
Speaking of exciting time, mate, you made your AFLW debut on the weekend for Wharf Radio, which is a volunteer digital radio station network that essentially will probably cover more games than any other radio network in the country. You had a banger on Saturday with the draw. How did you find the experience, sort of slotting back into the seat of calling AFLW?
Well, Chris, look, as you mentioned, after 19 seasons of calling SANFL, I must admit, I thought my chance of AFL or AFLW had possibly passed me by with that sort of stuff. But when the Wharf Radio concept came up through Peter Holden, look, myself, Phil Herden, Phil Aspinall, John Nankerville, we were really, really keen to jump on board with this sort of stuff and see if we could play a small part in what has been a really successful opening couple of seasons for Wharf Radio. And the bonus for me is I'm a passionate, dyed-in-the-wool, rabid front row of the cheer squad member of the Gold Coast Suns. So getting an opportunity to actually call your own team makes it all the more exciting. The slight downside with what was a fantastic result, Chris, I'm still yet to see the Suns win on Adelaide soil, ever. In all the times I've been a fan of the Suns, and I've been a member for 12 years, we have never won at Adelaide Oval. And now, just when I was getting a bit excited with about 30 seconds to go last week, we still haven't won a AFLW game that I've actually been at. So I'm starting to wonder if I'm actually the curse for the Suns here in Adelaide.
Oh, come on, jump off the bandwagon, mate, and they might start winning. We're getting into finals, although mathematically, as we sit here on October 23, they are a very good chance to even host a home final in their maiden finals appearance, mate. So you just never know.
And getting back to the game itself, it was a really exciting contest. I mean, obviously the Suns jumped out nice and early, got it out to that 19-point lead at quarter time, and I think most even at the ground. There was only 1850 there, according to the paper. It felt a lot more than that. It was a really passionate home crowd for Yarrapulti. You thought the Suns were going to run away with it, but the home team were fantastic, worked their way back into the contest, hit the front there as well. The wind did have a little bit of influence there as well, but it was an absolutely fantastic game to call. And as we said at the final siren, neither team deserved to lose that one. Possibly neither deserved to win either. So a draw was actually the fitting result for it. And look, the main thing for us, Chris, is that we got through with no technical issues for our very first game for Wharf Radio. We were really honoured to be part of that first team. And to get through without a tech issue or any magic words going to air or anything that can possibly happen, we were all really thrilled as a collective about that.
Yeah, it must have been something special in the air because we did the same as well for Brisbane and Adelaide. So there was just something in the air on the weekend. Now, you've been in the SANFL gig, mate, now for 19 years. I guess the $1 million question is, why broadcasting? Why? What sort of triggered that passion to go, you know what, I'm going to give this a crack?
Look, I grew up with the golden era, Chris. I turned, and I don't really like to say this age, 50 a few weeks back.
So I was
part of the. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if it's happy or commiserations just yet. I mean, the hair's telling me one way, the body tells me another. I was part of the golden era of SANFL, Chris. So the 1970s, 1980s, it was an absolutely fantastic time here in South Australia with the SANFL. We had multiple radio broadcasts, TV broadcasts along the way, and I grew up listening to some very, very esteemed broadcasters, Peter Marker, Ian Day, Bruce McAvaney on the TV, the likes of Rob McLeod, Brian Lees, Ken Cunningham on the radio. And when I was a kid, I was always one of those ones who just wanted to have a crack at something like that. And my ambition was to just call one match. All I wanted to do was call one match. As I sat there cross-legged on the kitchen floor, watching Peter Marker, Ian Day, Bruce McAvaney, Sandy Roberts, all those guys on the TV, I thought I'd love to just do this just once. In the intervening years, I played myself in the country. I coached myself in the country there as well. Unfortunately, finished up with playing at a much earlier age than I ever expected. Had bung shoulders and they just kept going out. I was starting to move more in towards the country media side of things. I was doing a lot of work for the local country newspapers up there covering the local league. And an opportunity came up when Channel 31, now known as Channel 44, moved into South Australia. And they had an opening there for someone to move into their sports department there. And with community TV, Chris, a sports department is usually one person. So
Of course.
I had the opportunity of moving in there and being my own boss in a lot of ways, I suppose, there as well. So I hosted and created and produced 2 SANFL TV shows starting in 2004 from there. And from there, the opportunities just opened up through community radio, through 5RPH, who took a punt on me, had me in the studio there for 2005 onwards. And from there, Chris, that's where the journey really began for me. And for that little kid who wanted to call one match to still be doing so 19 seasons later, mate, I pinch myself all the time. And I'm a very, very lucky, very, very blessed individual, thanks to the faith of a lot of people along the way, and we'll talk about those down the track, who took a punt on me as well and gave me that opportunity, to still be here at the age of 50, still calling SANFL and moving into AFLW, mate. It's an absolute privilege. It's an absolute thrill.
Yeah, it's something you just don't get sick of. It's a drug that once you have one bite of it, it really does take you on a wild ride. You touched on people that sort of open doors for you. Now, we can't push that enough, is that in the world of broadcasting, I believe in the capacity to be able to pay it forward. So you've got people that open doors for you and you can do it in return. Who were some of the people that opened up doors for you? Where did they open to? And I guess, how did you come to meeting those people to begin with?
Channel 31 was where a lot of it really started, I suppose, with that sort of things. Doing my own SANFL show. And again, we're talking about one man sitting at a desk talking for 15 minutes before we start getting guests in. But for the last show of the 2004 season, we did have a guest come in, and it was Phil Herden, who was working at 5RPH and had been working himself in the system for a couple of years along the way. He came in to be a co-host for that grand final show back in 2004. We hit it off just like that, and we've been good mates ever since. So when he was at RPH in 2005, he helped open the door for someone to move into the studio, help put the guys to air along the way. That was me. So for much of that first season, I was doing a lot of work in the studio, but there was also an opportunity that opened up here in Adelaide. While we had many radio stations and TV stations covering the SANFL, there was always one game a week that wouldn't be covered. And an outfit called Pine Lodge Studios used to film those games specifically for resale, for club fans and that sort of thing, and they needed commentary with it. So I got the call up back then to do a game out at Albert Oval, call the game. It wasn't going to a radio audience, but it was going to a TV audience of DVD buyers as much as anything else. That could have been 2 people or 100 people. And so from there, that opportunity came to call my very first game of play-by-play back then. So with C31, Channel 44, Phil Herden, 5RPH, a lot of people just showed faith in me along the way and kept giving me those opportunities. And as you said, it is all about giving opportunities. And I'll talk down the track about how I pay that forward now. But if it wasn't for the faith of those people, I'd probably still be sitting here, 19 seasons later, watching from the outer, probably standing at Nord Oval watching my beloved Redlegs.
Now, tell us about that first game, mate, because you never forget your first. And I know you don't forget some of the bigger moments that you've come through. But what happened in that game? Do you remember the scores, the outcome, the feelings of getting up in the morning going, I'm calling some AFL football today? What was that like?
Look, it was pretty exciting. To call SANFL was just a huge buzz, and Port won that day. They beat West Adelaide. The one thing that stands out from it, Chris, is that the scaffolding that we used to call from, it was actually between the Foss Williams stand and the Bob Quinn stand now. It's a lot better now than what it was. It has to be because they now have AFLW there. Back in the days, it's fair to say the scaffolding had seen much better days at that time. It was carrying a fair bit of rust up there, and it was a very, very windy day. And as
of
I
course
was only saying, it was, yeah, look, believe me, I can tell you what the wind was like that day. And I seriously thought a number of times with that wind flooding through, I thought my contribution to SANFL that season would be in the in memoriam section at the McGarry Medal. I was actually going to tip over or something like that. It was a very hair-raising experience, quite literally, to do that. But I just remember thinking what a buzz this was. People that I'd idolised as players for so many years, Jeremy Clayton, the likes running around there. Here I was actually commentating on them. And those first few games, that first season, gee, I had a lot to work on. It was working on the pace of things, making sure you didn't over complicate things with too many descriptions. And early on, I fell into that trap that most broadcasters do. You try to describe every single thing and not miss a single player and all that sort of stuff. And as you would know, Chris, when you do that, you start getting into catch-up mode and you start losing what's going on ahead of the play because you're trying to recreate what's gone on behind the play that you might have missed. I've still got a DVD of that game. I've watched it once or twice ever since. Not because I'm ashamed of it or anything like that. It's because I want to actually move forward more than anything else and recognize that for a first game, there were always going to be a lot of flaws. And I knew that from that game, I was always going to improve. And slowly I did along the way.
And I guess, as you were saying before, when you first aspired to get into broadcasting, you got that one game. And in a sense, you've still got that one game that you can cherish because that's your first one. That's probably the big milestone, and everything else you get along the way, they're just added bonuses to that one game. AFL footballers, soccer players, cricketers, if they get that one game at state league, one game for Australia, whatever sport it is, they get that one, nothing can take that away from them. And you've still got that game as more of a keepsake that nothing can take that away from you.
And look, the funny thing with that too, Chris, Port and West matchups have provided some of the strangest moments in commentary for me over the years. Whether it comes down to one of the lowest aggregate winning scores, which we had many years back at Richmond Oval, Port Adelaide won 3-2 that night.
Wow.
Port West matchups seem to have a very strange thing for me where as soon as old CK turns up, it's going to be all sorts of bedlam going on the field that day. It seems I just dragged that sort of strange thing along with me. So anytime I look in the broadcasting schedule and see Port and West coming up, I wonder what's going to be coming up with that sort of matchup.
Now, mate, you've been in the Caper for 19 seasons. What have been some of the most challenging experiences that you've had? They're the ones you learn from. Dare I say, they're the ones you probably remember the most from. Has there been any moments where you've had a dirty day at the office on the microphone, the mic's broken? What's happened?
2006 probably comes to mind. I was sitting at Prospect Oval, largely minding my own business that day. I wasn't actually down to broadcast the game. I was doing around the grounds for 5RPH. 5RPH were doing Central District up at Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, for background for those interstate, is probably about 20 to 25 Ks from Prospect Oval. Long story short is that the guys at Elizabeth Oval, their equipment wouldn't go to air no matter what they tried. So the studio rang and said, look, do you have a mobile phone on you? Yes, I do. Yeah. Can you just call the North Glenelg game that you're sitting at just for the moment? Just call it on the telephone. We'll put that to air, and you can just call that game until the guys arrive from Elizabeth, and they'll try to get to air with that. I'd done no preparation because I wasn't intending to. I was just watching as a neutral observer. All I had in front of me was a budget and nothing else. Didn't have binoculars. Didn't have a headset. We're talking 2006, Chris. So headsets and mobile phones were probably more like those great big things that you saw back in the 70s. We didn't have them. So I had to sit there and call that game with zero preparation, zero binoculars at the back of a grandstand. Conscious there was a lot of people sitting around me too that wondering what was going on because I could see that I wasn't on air for radio or anything like that. And call Northern Glenelg on a very dirty, filthy, wet day when there were very few highlights to call, waiting for the RPH guys to come along. When they finally did arrive, it was an equipment issue. It wasn't so much a line issue, as you know, the old Telstra lines. They couldn't get things to air at Prospect either. So they're in the back of the grandstand behind me trying to get themselves to air. I'm still nattering away to myself on a mobile phone, which fortunately I had charged fully before I got out there. We're talking about an old Nokia brick, I might add, by the way, too. Not the flash phones that we've got today or anything like that. And as luck would have it, most of the play was actually in front of the grandstand that day because it was one of the biggest slogs you've ever seen. I can't even remember too much about the game except to say that Matthew Clark, I remember, had 65 hitouts that day in one of his very rare forays back in the SANFL playing for Glenelg. But the one thing that stood out to me, the two things that stood out to me, the crowd got right behind the whole thing. I had people running coffee to me at halftime. I had soup coming up. I had cakes and all that sort of stuff coming up. And when the game finally finished, literally 30 or 40 people turned around and applauded more than anything else, which was the most humbling experience ever more than anything else to actually have people recognise it was a bit of a difficult situation. But the crowd in the stand actually really helped me through that. And that's one that's very, very, very hard to top, I must admit. A cherished moment, but one that I look back and think, how on earth did I do that?
But let's be fair too, with the audience there in the grandstand, they would have loved having a backing track of someone describing everything that was happening in front of them anyway.
Bear in mind, though, I hadn't done preparation for this sort of stuff. So any errors in player ID, which, as you would know, is crucial to our role, they were going to be broadcast to an audience that was sitting right in front of you, ready to give you feedback with that sort of stuff. So when you're sort of holding a phone in one hand, a budget in the other, and trying to scan what's going on possibly 120 meters up the field with it, you work on your player ID pretty darn fast when you haven't prepared to call these guys. I hadn't actually called either team all season as it happened. So straight out of the frying pan into the fire, but a really fun experience in a lot of ways, and one I will certainly never forget. And the one thing I always say to new broadcasters, make sure the first thing you pack in your bag is a mobile phone charger.
Just take it to the bank, because you never know. That phone call might come and you might have to do it. I recall, I think it was back in 2012, we had tough Telstra lines at the time. We couldn't get an internet signal back to the studio on community radio, and I had to call the first quarter of a senior men's grand final off a mobile phone. And we had 2 tiers in the truck. So it was just me calling the first quarter of the biggest game of the year, keeping in mind we probably called, that was our 18th game of footy, 18th game of the final series. So the other guys had bit of a run. So I got used to calling a game off a mobile phone. And then when I was doing a job for SEN, we had some tech issues up with the NTFL up in the Northern Territory, and they couldn't get a signal back to the studio. So I said, well, there's 3 of you there. Flip the mobile phone upside down and just pass it down the line. You have your specials in the middle and I spoke to a number of tech people back at SEN down in Melbourne, and they said if we were in that position, we would have just given up and just said, well, look, we can't make this happen. I was working with a young kid who was wanting to learn a little bit about the desk in the SEN studios here in Queensland. And I said, see, I've been there before. I know what it's like. We made it work. And so the old mobile phone, mate, you are bang on. It can save you many, many times.
And the thing is, Chris, as you know, you make it happen. People say, how do you do it? Well, you just do it, because you know that you have to do it. Because you've got people listening to you, whether it's a man on a tractor out at Woodner or you've got 5,000 people in there. It's part of your job to bring them the game no matter what happens. They're not too fussed about your tech issues. They want to find out where's the ball, who's got it, what's the score, how much time's in the quarter. And that's your responsibility to do it, whether you've got the best setup in the world or on a mobile phone. And that's part of the responsibility we have as broadcasters. And we sometimes do forget that sort of stuff. It's a very esteemed role we have, because we're communicating outcomes and possible futures to an awful lot of stakeholders, whether it's a parent of an under 16 or someone who's listening for the very first time. And that's one thing I always keep in the back of my mind when I'm calling.
Do you feel that experience in 2006, where you literally had to call a game with zero preparation, did that give you the confidence going forward? And this applies to any other broadcaster who in any sport that has to be put in that situation. That moment you sort of had faith in yourself to go, well, look, if I have to get the call up again to do something without any preparation, then I can do it.
It certainly helped in a lot of ways. And radio back then was a lot harder to break into than what it is now. There were so many more radio outlets, but also back in that era, it was very much of you either had to have played at a reasonable level or had an extensive broadcasting background to break into SANFL. I had neither. I had a very strong playing and coaching background in the country. That meant nothing in SANFL. I'd been in broadcasting for 18 months by that point. So you really had to try and earn your stripes. I think that sort of experience did help me earn my stripes for a lot of people. And I found out later that game went to a lot further than just RPH listeners. Other people around the SANFL became aware of it and all that sort of thing. So, yes, I think it did help prepare me in a lot of ways. But as you would know, Chris, nothing can surprise us in broadcasting. We can get hit with all sorts of things at any time. Either equipment can go off air, you can have someone burst into a broadcasting box inadvertently, all sorts of things like that can happen. And you've just got to be prepared for every eventuality. And the key to it is always make sure that you keep your cool as much as possible. And it is hard sometimes to maintain composure in difficult situations. But that's one thing that we always have to keep working on very, very hard as broadcasters.
Speaking of working harder, we see football over the years here in the SANFL. It's a massive competition. It could be debated of whether that's the second best, third best. It's right up there in terms of worldwide. Let's be honest of the level that it is at. How hard is it to be committed week in, week out? When you get that spot, you've got to look over your shoulder a little bit. You miss 1 week, you could slide down the pecking order. From a life-work balance thing, how hard was it and how hard is it to be committed every single week to call and make sure that you're there?
Well, you've got to maintain commitment through love of what you're doing. I
Mm.
think that's the most important thing. If you lose that love of what you're doing and it starts to become a chore for you or it starts to become difficult, then step aside and let somebody else come in who has got that love for it and has got that passion for it. The moment it becomes difficult or it becomes awkward for you, that's probably someone tapping you on the shoulder saying, hey, your time's probably up. I still love football passionately. I
Mm-hmm.
love the SANFL competition. I love, being part of an AFL side of things. And at the moment, I've got twin 8-year-old boys, and one of my boys has just finished playing his first season of Aussie rules here in South Australia, and that's really reinvigorated my passion again for that side of things. So I think it's just important to keep your love for things as much as possible. And look, let's be honest, you're going to have days when the contest doesn't seem as great on paper as it should. But that comes down to respect for the product and respect for your audience as much as anything else. I still get butterflies calling 9th versus 10th in the middle of a cold July day, as I do as a grand final, as I do as state football. Once those butterflies start going again, it means that you're starting to go through the motions. And if you're not getting nervous, it means that you're becoming complacent with things. And as soon as you become complacent, again, that's when you look about giving it away. You've always got to make sure you maintain your processes, maintain your standards, work really hard on what you're doing, and keep lifting that bar. You mentioned about worrying about people coming up behind me. In some ways, I don't worry so much about that because at my stage of things, I'm working on SANFL now, mentoring a lot of the younger callers that are coming through, and I want those guys to take over from me. I want them to be the ones coming up in the rearview mirror because at some stage, I am probably going to be starting to get past it. It's not for a long time, I hope.
Yeah,
But when
yeah.
that does happen, there's young guys that are coming in ready to go, and for me, that's something I'm enormously enjoying, helping mentor some of these younger callers, some of these newer callers, so we've got a next generation that's ready to come through and ready to go straight away.
That's super exciting, and paying it forward is very crucial in the industry. Has it been hard over the journey where every Saturday or whatever it is, every time you look at your fixture and this is where you're going to be calling, to make yourself available? I mean, even at community level, state level, the level of commitment required to make yourself available every single week, it does take its toll. I have no doubt if you're committed to calling, you might have missed important family functions and bits and pieces during the season. Has that at times been tough? Because I know personally, when I first started calling, and probably even still this very day, I've been calling now for 13 years. I've probably can count on my hand maybe 4 times that I have not called a game on a weekend over hundreds of weeks, and that does bring about a fair bit of stress within the home life because I'm just so stubborn and adamant that I've got to be there, because if someone else doesn't, if I don't do it, someone else may, and I may not get the opportunity the following week.
Look, I'm very fortunate. I've got a really supportive family. My wife, Megan, we've been married for nearly 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been right behind me all the way. She comes from a football family herself, so she understands a lot of that side of commitment along the way too. But she's been so supportive of that whole side of things. And now that I've got 8-year-old boys, they're really supportive of it too. They understand that Saturdays or Sundays, as it may be,
Mm-hmm.
is generally dead start at the football. And if I'm not calling both days, and I try to make myself available to only call one day a weekend if I can nowadays, the other day is always going to be family time spent with the kids. Turn the mobile off. Don't have even the SANFL app or the AFL app or anything like that going on, and don't worry about the scores or anything like that. And just switch off from football, because football plays a huge role in my life, as it does in all broadcasters. But family comes first. I'm always going to have family. Once football's gone, I'm still going to have a family there. So to me, they're always my number one. I've always been able to work things around fairly well along the way. And like you, there's been a handful of times I haven't been able to. But if missing one game means that I don't get an opportunity the next week, well, that I tend to think is more on the organisation I'm working for than me, than anything else. And if it's an organisation that puts football ahead of family to that degree, well, maybe that's not something I want to engage with. I want to make sure that I have a healthy work-life balance. My weekday employers are incredibly supportive of what I do. I work in an environment where I actually use my voice all day there in a training environment. So they're very supportive of me taking a Friday afternoon off and all that sort of stuff to do preparation, because they know that I've got directly transferable skills that will assist them in a lot of ways with training, mentoring, etc., that side of things. So I've been really fortunate with that. But again, it comes down to choosing who you work with. And again, if someone that can't work around that, well, that's fine. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll see you later, sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because if you feel comfortable working there, the culture's fantastic, and you wouldn't change it for anything in the world. Before we get into our main discussion point of the week, I want to throw a couple of quick ones at you.
Sure.
Your biggest game that you've called so far, and what else do you want to? What's your next goal that you want to achieve? And I think someone that you're working with that you think has got some great potential, we've got to keep an eye out for in the future.
Biggest game, look, play-by-play that I've called, the 2014 Grand Final was pretty special for me. It was the first one we played at Adelaide Oval in about 40 years. It was the year after Football Park had closed.
Mm-hmm.
So that was between Nord and Port, traditional rivals here in the SANFL, calling it for 5 RPH. And I wasn't to know at the time, and none of us were, but that was actually the last Grand Final ever broadcast on 5 RPH. And it was Nord Port, and it went right down to the wire. It was a single kick margin, and the ball was deep in Port Adelaide's forward lines when the siren went and gave Nord the 2014 flag. As a Nord supporter, I was tremendously thrilled with that, and was able to keep it in check until just after the final siren, when a fairly long drought had been broken, but I managed to keep that in check on air. I was boundary rider for the 2013 Grand Final, which is the last one played at Football Park. We had 36,500 fans that day for Nord and North, and it was just an outstanding game, and it was an outstanding environment too. Everybody knew it was the end of Football Park. It was like a real party atmosphere. And for me to be the boundary rider, I also emceed the post-game presentation, so I got to present the medals to the winning team. Bring Max Bashir, who played a massive, massive role here in South Australia, up to present the Jack Oatey Medal and the Premiership Cup and all that sort of stuff. And my voice was the last one heard at senior level at Football Park in front of 36,500 people. And I remember going up onto that stage, and so many people said afterwards, were you nervous? I remember I wasn't nervous one jot. I remember just sitting there, just watching this and actually just soaking it in for a split second, and thinking what an enormous privilege that was to not only be part of the last game at Football Park, but the last game that ABC TV ever did. And after a wonderful, wonderful broadcasting time, that was the end of their time broadcasting SANFL before the rights moved to Channel 7 the next year. To play roles like that for organisations like ABC TV and 5RPH in both scenarios, that was absolutely enormous. And I was so privileged to have a small part in that. And that's something I think I'm always going to cherish. I'll never forget that last day at Football Park in particular.
I'm glad to see you actually take the opportunity to really embrace it, enjoy it, and really soak it in, because you're as a football fan, you absorb so much, and to be able to do that on the microphone, it's absolutely a fantastic thing to do. Anything else that's sort of left in your kit bag that you want to have a crack at during your commentary career?
Look, I think like all of us, who are at this level, I'd like to call an AFL men's game, but it's not something that's ever really driven me enormously. And again, a lot of people say, oh, you must want to move up to AFL. I'm really happy doing the SANFL at the moment. I'm incredibly grateful for Saturday and calling AFLW and having that opportunity, and hopefully more opportunities moving forward. But I've always been very grateful just to call one SANFL game, to be still doing so in 19 seasons. Most of my bucket's full in a lot of cases. If an AFL game at men's level does come up, look, I'd love to do that. It'd be a huge opportunity to do so. But Chris, I've been so lucky. I've called minor round, major round, grand finals at SANFL level, state football, called the last state game that was shown on free-to-air TV as an example. I've done most things I ever wanted to do. And you've got to bear in mind, again, when I came in, I wanted to do one game. Everything above and beyond that has been a massive bonus. And I just pinch myself, that I've had that opportunity. And the way I say it to a lot of people is, I'm still calling footy after 19 years, and nobody's worked out I can't call it that well yet.
And lastly, before we go on our sprint to our discussion point, mate, who from the SANFL we got to keep an eye on that you've worked with over recent times?
We've got some fantastic broadcasters coming through, Chris, and I'm loath to isolate too many, because that's not doing justice to a lot of the young ones that we do have coming through. And this is in absolutely no particular order, and I'm going to apologise in advance. There'll be some that I'll miss out. But a young lad by Tom Eglinton has been calling for a couple of seasons now, and he's done fantastic work in a very short period of time to now be calling league football and being a league football regular. For a young man that I've known since he was a very little boy, and I mean a very little boy, I've known Tom since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, to watch him come through and become a confident broadcaster at league level has been fantastic. Patrick Goldsmith is another young lad that's been calling for probably 3 seasons or thereabouts now. And again, he's a young man that approached us, did a lot of work for us in Life FM when I was working for them in the studio, and he's come through and calling league football now, called a grand final himself a season or 2 back. Tim Saul's another lad. He's had a later start than most of us, without betraying Tim's age. We're of the same broad generation, but he's come through in leaps and bounds in a very, very short period of time. But again, we've got so many good broadcasters coming through, Chris. We've got Lachlan Gould, who's coming through. We have Eden Abbott, who is the first female to call play-by-play in South Australia. I've called with her a couple of times, and she is doing wonderful work here in South Australia. But we have so many good young callers coming through. And that's the advantage with SANFL now that we have. With our product we call League Reserves, under 18s, under 16s. We have a live training course now for people in a TV environment where they can learn how to do things, much more opportunities than we had back in my day. With me, you wanted to call, you had to call on radio, you had to wait for someone to shuffle off, whatever. We have that opportunity now to bring people through in a training environment, and the SANFL do a wonderful job in encouraging that, embracing that, and helping support us all to help support these commentators by having this mentor arrangement. Myself and a number of the callers work with these young callers to bring that through. So the SANFL and Paul Childs in particular have done fantastic work in making sure we have this opportunity to bring the next level through and be ready to go when blokes like me shuffle off into the sunset and tune into SANFL now from the retirement home in a few years' time.
Magnificent. We've only got a brief time left, mate. We'll head to our discussion point of the weekend and of this week. And I've picked this one for you because I know it's very raw. It's very close to your heart. Explain the preparation that goes into preparing for an AFL radio call as a play-by-play commentator. What was your preparation like last week in the lead up to Port Adelaide, Yatapuli and Gold Coast in the AFLW?
Yeah, and so many people said, oh, you'll have no trouble with Gold Coast. You probably find yourself having more trouble when it's your own team because you're very conscious that everyone knows it's your team. It's no secret in South Australia I'm a Gold Coast Suns fan. The whole media knows that sort of stuff. So I knew there was going to be high expectations that from that opening bounce, I was going to need to nail the Gold Coast Suns players right from the word go. So it's lots of watching of footage, lots of watching back from the game, the Q Clash, games played right at the very start of the season, because you start to look through from the start of the season at any subtle changes in a play, you know, different ribbons in their hair or different ways that they pull up their socks and all those sorts of things, different coloured boots that they might be wearing throughout the whole process there along the way. So loads of watching of vision, particularly with Yatapuli there as well. Now, I have a slight advantage with a number of their players because they play SANFL W, which I also call a lot of here. So I can pick out a Cheyenne Hammond, pick out a Sachi Syme, all those sorts of things quite easily when they're playing for their respective South Adelaide and Nord. Putting them in a Port Adelaide jumper makes it a little bit different because you might have different coloured boots and play out of position and all that sort of thing. So it's lots and lots of studying of vision. Doing so with the sound down. I'm very particular about doing it with the sound down for at least a quarter. Then I'll turn it up because I need to be able to recognise them without having the help of a voice in my ears or something like that. I need to be able to recognise a Gemma Houghton coming straight towards me and not wait for Kelly Underwood to tell me who it is or anything like that, as you would know. Studying of numbers, keeping some basic facts there in the back, loads of study of statistics and all that sort of stuff. For an AFLW game, I probably had 6 to 7 hours of preparation at least there along the way. For a SANFL game, it's probably 4 to 5 hours per game or thereabouts that I put in. Again, vision, numbers, player ID. They're the big keys for it. Player ID, and player ID are so critical with that sort of stuff. You can get away with missing a player on radio because nobody knows. You can't get away with it when it's visual. So that's why it's so critical to look for those little things like taping, tattoos, boots, hair color, hairstyles, all of those sorts of things, wristbands, anything that can help you pick out a player that's coming towards you in a pack with a dozen or so others around them. So with that game, going back to that one, lots of looking at headshots in particular there as well, and just looking at hairstyle and that sort of stuff there as well. Certain players wear it up. Certain players have certain coloured ribbons in their hair. They're those little tiny things that, Chris, you would know as a broadcaster, can just help you out when there's a big pack on a very, very wet day, working out if it is, Charlie Rowbottom or the likes that's coming out of a pack.
We've only got a brief period of time left, but the last question I'll have on this space in with you is that you get to Monday morning, you've got the game on Saturday. When does your preparation start and how does that look in the lead up to the week?
Oh, look, I'll start studying vision probably from the Tuesday beforehand. I'll probably look at a quarter or so from each team leading up then. So it just starts to get the processes going for me along the way. I'll start ramping that up probably Thursday when I know the teams are due to start coming in. Again, I'll go back and watch another couple of quarters of both teams along the way. So I've probably watched, close to, half of a full game of each team. Then I'll start moving into Friday when I know the lineups. I'll start going in depth into stats. I'm a very statistical based person. I like to be able to mention that, Gemma Houghton's kicked goals in 4 of her last 5 matches or something like that. Certain player hasn't had a free kick for 6 weeks. Just those little sort of quirky things that you can work into a call. And I'll have stats that I won't use all season. But Chris, as you would know, preparation dictates that if you need it, there's a stopping play. You can look down and look at that straight away and put it aside. So, yeah, I'll probably start from Tuesday and start to really ramp it up there towards Friday. No point doing it Saturday. If you haven't nailed it by Saturday, you're not going to nail it. So Saturday mornings are spent with my kids more than anything else, and just enjoying a bit of downtime.
Absolutely perfect. Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining us here on Play by Pod, and your insights there in terms of your mentoring and growth and insight into the SANFL sport is absolutely wonderful. And I can't wait to see what other exciting chapters you add to your career over the next 19 years.
As all coaches say, Chris, I take it 1 week at a time, and I'm happy to I'm happy to get the 4 games along the way. As each game for me is a blessing and a privilege, and that's the one thing I'd ask all prospective callers to take it away. Never, ever, ever treat calling football as a right. It is not a right. It is a privilege. Embrace it as a privilege. Embrace your role in helping create your part of history, and also in describing the history that goes through for the next generation. So never treat this as a right. It's not. We are so privileged, and that's the one thing I'd ask all prospective callers to take away.
We appreciate everyone from jumping on board for the latest edition of Play by Pod. If you're a fan of this thing, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, and a number of other streaming platforms. Chris, thanks so much for joining us, mate. And I can't wait. Hopefully, there might be another AFLW game on the horizon for you, mate. And it's going to be an absolute cracker. If it's anything to go by, your first call.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat.